She spat on my plate and smiled as if daring me to notice. I'm Margaret, 54 years old, a widow who thought peace could be rebuilt inside my brother's house. When I moved in after my husband's passing, Diane, my sister-in-law, met me with sweetness so polished it gleamed. She spoke of family, of new beginnings, and I believed her. I believed that love could be enough. That night, the roast chicken filled the air, rich with thyme and oil. The candle on the table flickered in rhythm with her voice, soft and deliberate, a melody that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Do you like it?" she asked. "It's perfect," I said. "Thank you." Her smile sharpened. "Eat before it cools." The warmth of the house felt rehearsed, too clean, too careful. I tried to focus on the smell of home, but unease began to thread itself through the air like smoke. She leaned closer, poured herself more wine, then did it. She spat, slowly, precisely, onto my dinner plate. The sound was faint, a drop against porcelain. I froze. My throat burned. For a moment, I thought I'd imagined it, but her eyes held mine like an accusation I couldn't defend against. The candlelight trembled between us. I pushed the plate away, quietly, so the chair wouldn't scrape. My brother was out of town. Only silence, and her smile remained. "What's wrong?" she whispered. "Not hungry?" My lips pressed together. "I've lost my appetite." "You should eat," she murmured. "It's bad manners to waste food." I walked away before I could speak words I'd regret. In the kitchen sink, I ran the tap until water drowned the thudding in my chest. The scent of burnt oil and something sour clung to my hands no matter how much I scrubbed. Her footsteps didn't follow. That silence, it felt like victory to her, punishment to me. I sat alone in the guest room, the candle from dinner now a shadow on my palm. I thought about what she wanted: control, humiliation, or maybe something deeper, older. Diane was a woman who smiled only when she was winning. And that night, she'd won my silence. I remembered my mother's old saying, "Some people test you not to see your strength, but your threshold." Maybe Diane wanted to know how much pain I'd swallow before I broke. My heart ached, but another thought rose, one that steadied me. If she needed darkness to feel strong, then I'd light something she couldn't touch. I stood, lit the same candle again, and watched the small flame grow. Its glow softened the room, gentler than any apology I'd never receive. "Not tonight," I whispered. "You won't break me tonight." The scent of wax filled the air, faintly sweet, defiant. I stared at the flame until my reflection shimmered back. I didn't see a victim. I saw someone waiting to understand, someone ready to find proof of what had begun long before that dinner. Outside, the house sighed, settling into quiet deceit. I knew this was no accident, no passing cruelty. It was a beginning, a test that had already been planned. And if she thought I would simply swallow it down and fade into the walls, she didn't know me at all. I swore the candle would never die again. I placed the camera not to spy, but to survive. The morning after that dinner, sunlight tried to act innocent, filtering through the curtains like it didn't know what had happened. Diane hummed in the kitchen, pouring coffee, her tone sweet as syrup. "You slept well?" she asked. "Well enough," I said, my voice steady though my hands weren't. She smiled. "Good. We'll keep things peaceful here." Peaceful. The word hung like smoke, too thick to breathe. I carried my cup to the sink, pretending to rinse it longer than needed. The sound of running water masked the tiny click as I slipped the camera behind the curtain rod. One small black eye, blinking silently in the folds of fabric. It wasn't revenge. It was survival. I needed proof of what I'd felt. The venom behind her laughter, the malice hiding beneath polite words. If she thought I was imagining things, soon she'd see what imagination could capture. For days, I played my role. I smiled at her jokes, complimented her casseroles, even thanked her for washing the dishes she'd never really cleaned. The camera hummed faintly at night, a mechanical heartbeat keeping watch when I couldn't. Its sound became a strange comfort, like someone breathing nearby, promising that truth was recording itself even when I was too afraid to speak it aloud. The first week passed quietly, too quietly. On the 7th evening, I sat alone replaying footage on my laptop. The sound wavered, soft footsteps, whispers near the doorway. Then her voice, sharp and low. "She thinks I'm done with her." A pause. A man's voice, unfamiliar, distant. "She'll leave soon enough. I'll make sure." Laughter followed, like glass being dropped and caught before it shattered. I froze the frame. Her reflection glimmered in the window behind her, half shadow, half satisfaction. The air in my chest turned cold. This wasn't paranoia. It was strategy. She wanted me gone. Maybe worse. That night, I couldn't sleep. The hum of the refrigerator filled the silence, steady as guilt. I stared at the ceiling and whispered, "You're not crazy." Over and over, until the words started sounding like someone else's voice. By morning, Diane was cheerful again, setting the table as if nothing had changed. "Coffee?" she asked. I nodded. She leaned close. "You look tired. Dreams keeping you up?" "Something like that," I said. Her eyes lingered, searching me the way a cat studies prey. "You should rest more." The words were kind, but the tone, there it was again, that sharpness wrapped in honey. I wondered if she could feel the camera watching her, if some part of her sensed the quiet war blooming in the corners of her kitchen. Every evening, I reviewed another fragment. Sometimes it was only her pacing, checking locks, muttering names. Once, she stood in front of my door for exactly 2 minutes, whispering something I couldn't quite catch. "You'll learn, maybe," or "you'll leave." Either way, it was enough to chill the blood behind my ribs. I started marking times and dates in a small notebook. Tuesday, 10:14 p.m. Door whisper. Thursday, 7:32 p.m. Call with unknown male voice. The pattern was building. The house wasn't a home anymore. It was evidence, waiting for someone to believe it. Still, I smiled at her over dinner. Still, I said goodnight. Because the moment she realized I knew, she'd stop pretending. And I wasn't ready for the mask to fall just yet. I needed her performance, her arrogance, her confidence that I was too weak to fight back. Every sound in the house became louder, the creak of stairs, the thud of drawers, even the wind rattling the window panes. I started hearing the camera in my dreams, its faint mechanical pulse syncing with my heartbeat. It wasn't fear anymore. It was focus. I knew what I had to do next. Collect, wait, protect. No one would believe me yet, not without proof. But soon, I'd have her own voice, her own words, to expose her cruelty. The camera heard what I dared not say. Numbers don't lie, but people do. It began with a single envelope left on the hall table, one she claimed was junk mail. The paper looked ordinary, but something in me said, "Open it." Inside was a bank statement I hadn't seen before, bearing my late husband's name. The paper felt smooth, too smooth, like deceit polished to perfection. I scanned the numbers, once, twice, my pulse ticking with every comma. $4,200, then $6,300, then $2,900. The totals blurred into a single figure, $13,400 gone, signed by her. I walked to her room that night, the checkbook in my hand like evidence still warm from crime. She sat brushing her hair, humming the same tune she'd used when pretending to care for me. "Diane," I said softly, "can we talk?" She didn't turn. "Always," she answered. "There are withdrawals here," I said, placing the papers on her dresser. "From the joint account, my husband's estate." Her hand paused mid-stroke. "Oh, that," she smiled in the mirror. "You must have authorized them, dear. You forget things sometimes." "I don't forget numbers," I said. She laughed, quiet and sharp. "Well, perhaps grief does strange things to memory." 3 words clawed through me. Grief, memory, forget. They weren't concern, they were accusation. I stepped closer. "You forged his name." "Be careful what you accuse," she whispered. "Banks listen poorly to widows." Her calm voice scratched at my sanity. For a moment, I almost doubted myself. Almost. Then I looked at the keys on her dresser, one of them small and brass, marked with tape, that read simply, "Safe." I knew where that safe was. Later, after she left for the store, I opened it. Inside lay a neat row of old statements, all bearing the same looping signature. My husband's hand had been steady. This was imitation, too elegant, too recent. The scent of ink still lingered, faint and chemical. My stomach turned. I took photos, slid one sheet into my purse. The next morning, I went to the bank. The teller, a young woman named Anna, glanced from the papers to my face. "Who signed these?" she asked. "Supposedly me," I said. She looked again. "Ma'am, the handwriting doesn't match your file." A tight silence filled the space between us. Behind the counter, the hum of a printer sounded like breathing in a sick room. She lowered her voice. "You're not the first she's fooled." The sentence hit harder than any proof. I pressed my hands against the counter, feeling the texture of the paper edges. Thin, dishonest, but solid. I realized then the real danger wasn't what she took. It was what she was building. A story where I was unstable, careless, senile even. Every forged check was a stone in that wall. When I got home, she was waiting by the window, smiling too early. "Did you enjoy your little errand?" she asked. I set my bag down gently. "You shouldn't underestimate who remembers details." She tilted her head. "I worry about your health." I met her gaze, steady. "You should worry about your own." For a flicker, her mask slipped, eyes narrowing, the smile hardening into calculation. Then she turned away, humming again, dismissing me as if I were nothing more than background noise. But I saw it, the faint tremor in her hand when she picked up her coffee cup. That was my proof. Fear had finally reached her. That night, I placed every document into a folder labeled Household Accounts, Reference 9F. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew what justice would need. Evidence with texture, weight, and truth. Numbers could lie when forged, but once exposed, they burned through the page like fire under glass. The teller's whisper replayed in my mind long after I turned off the light. "You're not the first she's fooled." Her kindness was currency, and I was her debt. The counselor's office was colder than I expected. Not just the air, but the tone. The kind that makes you hold your breath a little longer, unsure if you're allowed to exhale. I sat across from her, my fingers wrapped around a cup of lukewarm tea. The ceramic was warm against my palms, but it couldn't touch the frost inside the room. Diane sat beside me, back straight, eyes lowered like she'd rehearsed the posture of concern. The counselor smiled kindly. "So, what brings you both here today?" Diane's voice arrived first, steady, honeyed, polished. "I'm just worried about her," she said, glancing at me before turning back to the counselor. "She's fragile lately, forgetting small things, bills, conversations, even where she puts her medication." I felt the words scrape against my ribs. Fragile, forgetful. She was building a story right there in front of me, brick by brick, and each one made me smaller. "I see," the counselor said. "Has this been going on long?" "Oh, yes," Diane breathed, pressing a hand dramatically to her chest. "I try to help, of course, but sometimes she resists. I think she's embarrassed." Embarrassed. My jaw clenched. I wanted to speak, but the air in the room seemed rationed, and she'd taken most of it already. The counselor turned toward me gently. "Is that true? Have you been feeling disoriented lately?" I met his eyes. "No," I said plainly, "but I have been feeling manipulated." The silence afterward wasn't empty. It was charged. Diane's lips parted, ready to object, but I raised a hand slightly. "She's not helping me. She's controlling me. There's a difference." Her laugh came light, practiced. "Oh, that's what grief does. It twists things. She's still adjusting, you know. Her kindness, I realized, was her shield. Every word she spoke dripped with virtue, as if decency itself owed her a debt. She'd mastered the art of weaponized generosity, smiling while cutting the ground from under me. The counselor scribbled something on his notepad. I leaned forward slightly. "Write this down, too," I said quietly. "People can fake concern for years. Some even make it their hobby." Diane stiffened beside me. "You're being unfair," she whispered. I turned my head slowly. "Am I? Or are you just afraid someone's finally listening?" Her eyes glistened. Perfect. A single tear slid down, like a rehearsed cue in a performance she'd repeated countless times. The counselor offered her a tissue. "It's all right," he said softly. "Family tension can be complex." I wanted to laugh. Complex. That word had been her disguise all along. Complexity sounds noble. It makes cruelty sound like art. But this wasn't complex. It was calculated. As she dabbed her eyes, I noticed the counselor's folder on his desk. A single intake form peeked out, marked with the date and our initials, reference 4A21C. That form, I thought, would one day tell another story. A record of the day her mask began to slip. The warmth of the cup in my hands faded as the air conditioning blew harder. The chill pressed against my skin, reminding me I wasn't crazy, just cold from standing too long in someone else's shadow. When the session ended, Diane placed a hand on my arm, her voice syrupy again. "I hope you feel better after this," she said. "It's good to let things out." I pulled away, smiling faintly. "Oh, I'm just getting started." Her tears weren't sorrow. They were strategy. I watched her wipe them, watched the counselor nod sympathetically, and I finally understood her motive. She didn't just want control of money or space, she wanted control of truth itself, and she'd nearly gotten away with it. Outside, the winter air hit like honesty. My breath fogged before me as I whispered, "She's kind until kindness costs her power." The paper cup trembled slightly in my grip, the heat long gone, but the lesson burned. Her tears were my evidence. Curiosity opens doors, but guilt locks drawers. It was late afternoon when she left for her errands, humming through the hallway like guilt could carry a tune. The house was quiet again, too still for comfort, the kind of silence that listens back. I stared at the drawer in her study, oak, polished, locked. I'd seen her use it before, always careful, always checking that I was out of sight. That drawer had a pulse of its own. I told myself not to look. I told myself to wait. But curiosity doesn't wait. It breathes down your neck until you answer it. I found the small brass key taped under the desk, a habit she'd probably learned from television dramas. Fitting, I thought, since she'd turned our lives into one. The drawer creaked open like an exhale after a long lie. Inside lay a phone, separate from her usual one, a smaller device, black, its screen already lighting up before I touched it. The glow was cold, clinical, almost cruel. I scrolled. Dozens of messages filled the screen, her name atop every thread. The words were short and vicious. "She's losing it. I'll push her out soon. Make sure the documents are ready." And then a final one that turned my hands to ice. "Once she's gone, everything falls to us." Her brother's replies were even worse. "You're brilliant, Diane. Keep her calm until it's done." The messages went back weeks, months even. Every smile she'd given me had a timestamp. Every kindness had a strategy. I printed them from her small wireless printer, each page hissing out like breath through teeth. The smell of toner clung to the room, sharp and chemical, as if even the air disapproved. I slipped the papers into a folder marked Household Receipts Reference 6C. I knew I couldn't confront her yet. She thrived on performance, and I needed truth that couldn't be rehearsed away. Instead, I drove to the local precinct. The officer at the counter, a man in his 40s, polite but distant, read through the printouts. "You've done the right thing," he said. His voice was firm, not kind. But be patient. We'll need time to verify everything. Time? I asked. How much time? As long as it takes to prove intent, he replied, sliding the folder back across the counter. Until then, keep yourself safe. I nodded. Intent. That word echoed as I walked out. It wasn't just proof of what she'd done, it was proof of who she was. By the time I returned home, evening had fallen. The light in the hallway was dim, soft gold bleeding into shadow. Her car was already in this driveway. My pulse quickened. She greeted me at the door, smiling. Too wide, too certain. "Did you go out?" she asked, hanging her coat like a queen returning to her throne. "Just for air," I said evenly. "Good," she replied. "It's good to get out sometimes." She watched me longer than she should have, eyes narrowing slightly, then drifted toward her study. I listened for the sound of the drawer, for the realization that her secret world had been touched. Minutes passed, and then her voice, low, careful, calling my name. I didn't answer. Later that night, she knocked softly on my door. "Are you awake?" she asked. I stared at the handle, my hand resting just above the lock. "Go to bed, Diane." Silence followed, heavy and aware. Her footsteps retreated down the hall. In that moment, my boundaries crystallized. No more shared meals, no more late-night talks about nothing. The line between us was no longer invisible. It was a wall. The lock clicked beneath my fingers, final and familiar. I sat on the edge of the bed, watching the faint light from the street spill across the floor like a warning. She knocked, but I kept the door locked. Truth sometimes peers through another's glass. It started with a knock on the back fence, 3 gentle taps that broke the stillness of the afternoon. I looked up from the sink and saw Mrs. Harlow, my neighbor, standing at her kitchen window, her hand trembling around a folded piece of paper. She motioned for me to come closer, then slipped the note through the gap in the wooden board separating our yards. Her face was pale, lips tight, eyes saying more than the paper ever could. I opened it carefully, my fingers leaving faint creases on the edge. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were steady. "I saw her tamper with your food." For a long moment, I couldn't breathe. The light in my kitchen seemed to shift, harsher somehow, as if the air itself had turned into a witness. My stomach twisted, not with fear, but with clarity. I wasn't imagining this. Someone else had seen the rot beneath her charm. That night, I waited. The lamp on the counter cast a small pool of light, enough to keep me alert, but not enough for her to suspect. I'd placed another camera, this one trained on the stove. Its lens glinted faintly, catching the gold edge of the lamp's reflection. Every sound in the house seemed louder now. The tick of the clock, the faint hum of the refrigerator, the creak of old floorboards that seemed to flinch under deceit. She came in humming softly, holding a small bottle that caught the light like liquid glass. Her movements were deliberate, confident. She reached for the pot of broth simmering on the stove, uncapped the bottle, and poured. The liquid hissed faintly as it met the steam. My throat tightened. The smell changed, sharper, acrid, unmistakable. I stayed silent, heart thudding in time with the drip of poison into trust. She stirred once, twice, then turned off the stove and smiled at her reflection in the window. I watched from the hallway, the camera blinking like an unblinking eye. When she finally left, I walked forward and stared into the pot. The surface shimmered under the lamplight, innocent at a glance, lethal beneath. I didn't touch it. Instead, I poured it down the sink slowly, feeling every ounce of betrayal swirl away like wasted mercy. Later, I confronted her, not with shouting, not with tears, just quiet certainty. "I know what you did." She tilted her head, feigning confusion. "What's that supposed to mean?" "You put something in the food." Her eyes widened, then narrowed again. "You think I'd waste bleach on you?" My skin prickled at her choice of words. She laughed, a hollow, brittle sound. "No one will believe you," she said. "You've been acting strange for months. They'll say you're paranoid." Maybe once that would have worked, but not now. I stepped closer, my voice low but steady. "Then I guess the camera will have to speak for me." For the first time, her confidence faltered. Her gaze darted toward the kitchen window, where the lamp still glowed softly beside the curtain. She turned to it as if realizing, too late, that truth might already be framed behind glass. That night, I sent the footage to a friend, a lawyer I trusted more than my own blood. His reply came within minutes. "Keep everything. Don't delete a second." I didn't sleep. I sat by the lamp watching its light tremble faintly in the draft from the open window. It wasn't just a lamp anymore. It was a witness, silent but steadfast. Every flicker felt like an oath, every shadow like a warning. Through the neighbor's window, I saw Mrs. Harlow watching my house again. She nodded once, slow and solemn, as if to say she'd stand with me when the truth demanded a voice. But then, as the night deepened, the lamp flickered, and I knew she'd seen me record. I sent truth in an envelope she couldn't burn. The paper was thick, official, the kind that makes words feel heavier once they're written. I typed every sentence slowly, each key press deliberate, every fact measured. Her withdrawals, her signatures, her lies. The ink bled slightly on the page, catching under the light. I could feel the grain of the envelope under my fingertips, a texture almost sacred. For the first time, my shaking hands weren't from fear. They were from resolve. I sealed the envelope and pressed the stamp down like a verdict. It wasn't revenge. It was record-keeping, the kind that institutions couldn't ignore. I walked to the post office myself, each step echoing like punctuation. When the clerk asked if I wanted tracking, I said, "Yes, I want to know when truth arrives." 3 days later, it did. A man in a dark suit showed up at the house, polite but precise. He introduced himself as an auditor from the bank's internal investigations team. His tone carried that quiet authority of someone who'd seen too many family betrayals disguised as financial oversight. "We're just here to confirm a few details," he said. Diane appeared in the doorway, smiling her signature smile, too gracious, too calm. "Oh, of course," she said, as if the audit were a form of flattery. "I'm happy to help." He set a folder on the table. "These transactions," he began, "were initiated under your authorization, correct? Withdrawals totaling $4,200, $6,300, and $2,900. Her mouth moved, but no sound came. For once, silence was her truest language. She tried to recover, her voice suddenly soft. I must have mixed something up. It's been such a difficult year." The auditor nodded. Professional, but unyielding. "Understandable, but we'll need a statement signed today. And we'll also need to verify these signatures." He laid the pages down, each one marked with her careful forgeries, looped letters pretending innocence. I stood by the counter, pretending to make tea, but every clink of porcelain was a drumbeat of justice. I didn't gloat. I observed. Watching her composure unravel was like watching wallpaper peel, slow, inevitable, revealing the cracks beneath. When he left, she turned on me. "You had no right," she hissed. "I had every right," I said quietly. "You took what wasn't yours." Her laugh came brittle. "Do you think they'll take your side? You've always been dramatic." "Not dramatic," I said. "Documented." That word landed harder than I intended. Documented. She'd built her empire on secrecy. I'd built my defense on paper. And paper doesn't lie. That evening, I sat at the dining table where all this began, surrounded by copies, notes, and bank printouts. The light from the small lamp hit the envelope's seal still resting beside me, creased now, but whole. Its texture reminded me that even something fragile could carry weight if handled with purpose. My phone rang. It was the auditor again. "We've found enough to open a formal case," he said. "Her account access will be temporarily frozen pending verification." His tone was measured, but I could hear the subtext. "You were right." I thanked him, though my voice broke slightly. It wasn't victory, it was vindication. And that's something sharper, colder, cleaner. When I looked up, I saw Diane through the hallway mirror, standing in the dark, her reflection half swallowed by shadow. She didn't speak. Neither did I. But in that silence, the power shifted, permanently. I realized then that paperwork, for all its dryness, had become something sacred. Proof wasn't just about justice. It was about reclaiming the narrative she'd tried to steal. The envelope sat before me, edges frayed but intact. Once it had been just paper. Now it was armor. The envelope had become my armor. She threw the pot, but I caught the truth. The argument started before the phone even rang. I could feel it coming, the tension gathering like a storm under the floorboards. The air was heavy, thick with something unspoken. The call came just after noon, the bank investigator. His voice was measured, professional, but it carried weight. "We've confirmed discrepancies in her account," he said. "We'll be issuing a formal notice within 48 hours. She overheard. Of course she did. Her footsteps approached, slow, deliberate. The kitchen light flickered as she entered, and for a moment, we just stared at each other. "You went behind my back," she whispered, her voice trembling at first, then hardening like glass. "You stole from me," I replied. Her face twisted, all pretense stripped away. "You think they'll believe you? You're the guest here." "Not anymore," I said. "I'm the one who stayed honest." The silence broke before I could step away. She reached for the pot on the stove, a heavy steel one, half filled with broth, and hurled it across the room. It hit the wall just above my shoulder, exploding in a burst of steam and shrapnel. The crash rang through the house, an awful metallic roar that seemed to split time in half. For a second, I couldn't hear anything but the echo. Then her sobbing filled the room, loud, theatrical, desperate. "You made me do this," she cried. But her voice didn't sound like guilt. It sounded like performance. I picked up the phone. My hands didn't shake this time. "Emergency services," I said, keeping my tone even. "There's been an assault." Within minutes, sirens replaced her crying. The sound grew louder until it felt like justice itself was arriving in waves. 2 officers entered. The first, a calm sergeant with a soft but steady gaze. The second, younger, scanning the room with quick precision. The sergeant spoke first. "Ma'am, can you tell us what happened?" "She attacked me," Diane blurted, voice quivering on cue. "She's losing control. I was just trying to cook." He looked at me then, eyes steady. "And your version?" I pointed to the wall. The pot lay dented on the floor, its contents splattered across the tile like evidence that couldn't be rewritten. "That's my version," I said quietly. He nodded, writing into his pad. "We'll take statements separately." His calm voice steadied me more than I expected. The other officer took photos, measured the distance, logged the broken fragments into what he called Incident Reference H2194. The sound of his pen scratching paper became its own rhythm, an official heartbeat. Diane sat at the table now, clutching a tissue she didn't use. Her mascara bled down one cheek. "I'm sorry," she murmured. "I didn't mean to. I just lost my temper." The sergeant looked up from his notes. "Losing temper and throwing objects are not the same thing, ma'am." His words landed like judgment, but his tone stayed gentle. "Do you need a place to stay tonight?" "No," I said before she could answer. "She does." He studied me for a moment, maybe recognizing the years it took to say those 3 words without shaking. They took her statement, then mine. I watched him sign the bottom of the page before handing me a copy. The texture of the report felt rough, coarse, grounding. Proof in paper form again, my second armor. As they left, he paused at the door. "You did the right thing calling us," he said. "Don't second-guess that." I nodded. "I won't." When the door closed, the house exhaled. The quiet was thick, but not empty. It was earned. I looked at the dented wall, the dripping broth, the small smear of metal against paint. It would stay there for a while, a scar with a sound behind it. That sound still echoes when I think of that day, the metallic scream, the crash that turned silence into evidence. Her scream still rings in the report. She apologized to the camera, not to me. Her voice came through the television before her face appeared. "I only wanted peace," she said, her tone honeyed, rehearsed. The news anchor nodded sympathetically, the studio lights catching her carefully powdered skin. I stood in the living room, remote in hand, watching the performance unfold. The camera loved her, until it didn't. Her smile was calculated, the same one she used at church gatherings and charity dinners, the one that always made people forget what she'd done the week before. She blinked slowly, hands folded, her voice quivering just enough to sound sincere. "She's been unstable lately," she continued, "and I've tried my best to care for her." The words slid like ice across my skin. I'd known she would try this, turning the story upside down, but hearing it out loud was worse than I'd imagined. Lies sound cleaner when dressed in sympathy. The reporter asked a gentle question, one meant to coax confession, not confrontation. "Do you still hope to reconcile?" "Oh, of course," she said quickly. "I believe in forgiveness." Forgiveness. The word almost made me laugh. I muted the sound before the bile rose too high. The room fell into silence, except for the faint hum of the television. The light from the screen flickered over the furniture, casting fractured reflections on the window pane, a camera's ghost replaying truth in reverse. I walked to the table where my laptop waited, already open. The footage I'd kept, the one she didn't know existed, was cued and ready. I hesitated for just a breath. Once uploaded, there'd be no going back. Then I hit send. Within minutes, the file began to spread. My lawyer friend had already coordinated with the local outlet. They uploaded it under the title, "Unseen Footage Raises Questions in Ongoing Case." The clip began quietly. A dinner table, a candle, the faint sound of laughter. Then her hand, her face, her act. She leaned forward and spat. The image froze midair, pure contempt, framed forever. The broadcast cut between her live interview and the footage. Her voice stuttered. That's not real," she insisted, eyes darting toward the monitor behind her. "It's been altered." But even through the screen, the panic bled through her poise. The anchor's expression changed subtly. Sympathy curdled into disbelief. "We verified the timestamp," he said softly. "It appears authentic." Her throat tightened. "Then someone's trying to destroy me," she said. No one answered. The clip replayed once more, and her image, smirking over cruelty, looped across every screen. The audience reaction was immediate. Comments poured in online. Disbelief, outrage, pity, then clarity. The narrative had shifted, irreversibly. By evening, her statement to the media was trending for all the wrong reasons. Headlines read, "Charity spokeswoman caught on tape mocking relative." The same face that had commanded pity now invited scrutiny. I didn't celebrate. I just sat by the dim light of the lamp, watching the replay one last time. Truth doesn't fade once it's captured. It blinds. It burns through sympathy until only honesty remains. A message popped on my screen from the same neighbor who once slipped me that note. Saw it. The world finally knows. I typed back only one word. Finally. Later that night, I turned off the lamp and caught my reflection in the dark window. Behind me, the muted television replayed her frozen smile again, the same half-smirk she'd worn the day she thought she'd won. But now it wasn't hers anymore. It belonged to the truth. Her reflection betrayed her live. A white envelope can summon both fear and freedom. It waited on the doorstep, edges crisp, seal unbroken. The kind of envelope that doesn't ask permission to change your life. I stood there longer than I meant to, the cold morning air biting at my skin. The world outside looked ordinary, birds on the fence, a child's bike across the street. but my breath carried the weight of something final. When I opened it, the sound of tearing paper felt louder than it should have. The heading read, Family Court, Hearing Notice, Docket 22B9F. Beneath it, lines of printed formality, dates, times, signatures, authority. My name on one side, hers on the other. The paper itself had texture, rough and deliberate, like justice pressed into pulp. My lawyer sat across from me later that afternoon, glasses low on his nose, the envelope flattened between us. "It's official," he said, voice steady. "She'll have to face everything. Withdrawals, forgery, the assault. It's all listed." I nodded. "So it begins." He studied me for a moment. "Are you ready?" "I've been ready for months," I said. "I just didn't have the paperwork to prove it." The line between fear and freedom is thinner than people think. It's the width of a single signature, the click of a pen, the stamp of an arbiter's seal. As he read the notice aloud, I traced the embossed crest with my thumb, the symbol of a system that had once ignored me. Now, it was etched into my defense. For the first time, the language of power spoke for me, not against me. I thought of all the nights I'd spent rehearsing the truth in my head, word by word, preparing for a moment when it would finally matter. Now, every detail, every date, every transaction, every bruise had a place in the record. The lies she'd built so carefully had turned into exhibits. "Once we file the affidavit," he continued, "she'll be bound by oath. No more performances, no more interviews, only facts." I smiled faintly. "Facts don't tremble under lights." He looked up. "You've come a long way." "Not far enough," I whispered. "Not until she admits what she did." That night, I placed the notice beside the lamp, letting the light fall across its surface. The embossed ink caught the glow, shimmering faintly. The lamp's hum filled the room, a soft, electric promise that truth was now documented, protected, and soon to be spoken aloud. I could almost hear the sound of a gavel in my head, clean, final, echoing through the hallways of a place that would no longer silence me. The stakes were clear. If I stayed silent now, every survivor who'd been gaslit, threatened, or dismissed would stay invisible too. But if I spoke, the echo might reach further than either of us expected. When I closed my eyes, I saw her reaction before it happened, the shock, the protest, the tremor of control slipping through her hands. And beneath that image, I saw something else. A courtroom bathed in morning light, the sound of shoes on marble, the subtle rustle of official paper being turned into evidence. Justice, I realized, doesn't arrive with thunder. It arrives in envelopes. The next morning, I ironed my blouse, packed the folder of documents, and ran my fingers once more along the edge of the notice. It felt rough, imperfect, alive, like truth itself. Next time we meet, it will be under oath. She faced the crowd, but couldn't face herself. The courtroom hummed like a held breath. Every seat was filled, reporters scribbling, cameras whispering, the air vibrating with curiosity and quiet judgment. I stood behind the podium, my palms resting on its cool wood, feeling every heartbeat travel through it. Across the aisle she sat perfectly still, her expression carved into something calm, almost holy. But her eyes refused to meet mine. The judge adjusted his glasses. "Proceed," he said, and the microphone hissed faintly to life. My voice came steady. "For months, she told people I was unstable. She tampered with my medication. She siphoned money from accounts under my name. She threw a pot when she realized I had proof." Each word landed heavier than I expected. The hum of the microphone caught my breath, turned it into something louder than emotion. Evidence. "She didn't just lie," I continued. "She calculated. Every act came dressed as kindness." Someone in the crowd exhaled sharply. Another murmured, but the judge's hand rose and silence settled again. Her lawyer stood next, smiling too easily. "Your Honor, these accusations stem from personal resentment. My client is a respected community member." "Play the recording," The judge interrupted. The screen lit up behind him. The footage flickered. Her kitchen, that familiar lamp, the way she leaned into the frame with venom disguised as charm. Her voice filled the room. "She won't even notice if I swap it. She trusts me too much." Then laughter, hers, clear and cold. A gasp rippled through the benches. Cameras clicked. The hum of the audio rolled like thunder under the ceiling's arches. Her lawyer froze. "This could be taken out of context." The judge didn't look up. "Context is for conversation. This is evidence." Diane's face drained of color. Her fingers gripped the edge of her table, white against wood. She turned to me then, and for the first time, her calm cracked. "You did this," she hissed under her breath. "No," I whispered. "You did." The clerk read aloud the official entry. Hearing transcript reference G4217, County Court Record. The sound of paper rustling felt almost sacred. Proof had become its own language now, one I could finally speak fluently. Then came the verdict motion. Protection order, County Court, 90 days. The words didn't echo, they anchored. I watched the arbiter sign the document. Ink against parchment. A line between past and possibility. The crowd didn't cheer, but they didn't need to. The silence was its own applause. For the first time, I wasn't standing in the shadow of her lies. I was standing in the light of their exposure. When I stepped away from the podium, the microphone squealed softly, the feedback sharp and cleansing. I paused, turned once more toward her, and saw the smallest fracture appear across her perfect composure, like porcelain under heat. Her lawyer reached to steady her arm. She pulled away, eyes unfocused, lips trembling, not from guilt, but from the loss of control. The judge's gavel rose. Time stretched. The sound when it fell was absolute. 3 sharp cracks against the wood, each one sealing a chapter. Justice didn't roar that day. It resonated, quiet, sure, irrevocable. The gavel fell, and her mask cracked. She tried to sue me for surviving her. The new petition arrived less than 2 weeks after the verdict, a thick folder stamped in red, heavy with self-pity. Defamation, emotional distress, it read. Diane's handwriting scrawled across the margin as though defiance could rewrite reality. I almost laughed. It wasn't grief she wanted to recover, it was power. Her lawyer strutted through the courtroom that morning like an actor reprising a bad role. He held up a newspaper headline, "Family Betrayal Trial Ends in Protection Order." His voice trembled with forced outrage. "Your Honor," he declared, "this coverage has destroyed my client's reputation." Destroyed? She had done that herself. My attorney, calm as ever, flipped open a binder. "We'll respond with proof," he said, his tone razor-sharp but quiet. The smell of ink from the printed pages drifted through the room, a strange mixture of law and exhaustion. He read aloud the timestamps from the emails she'd sent, messages layered with manipulation and veiled threats. Then came the text records, entry A17 through A19, each one a contradiction to her public claims. Every word had a date. Every date had a witness. Truth, when bound to evidence, doesn't shake. She fidgeted in her chair, tapping her pen against the table. Tap, tap, tap. The rhythm of desperation. Her lawyer pressed again, voice rising. The defendant weaponized public sympathy. She used the press to damage a good woman's name. "Good women," my attorney replied, "don't tamper with financial documents or poison trust. We've already submitted proof of both under-reference IDs, P33 and P34. The judge leaned forward slightly. "I've reviewed the filings. Unless you have new evidence, counselor, this is a waste of the court's time." Silence followed, broken only by the faint hum of the ceiling fan. Even the air seemed tired of her performances. I watched Diane's composure crumble in slow motion. Her lips twitched as she leaned toward her lawyer, whispering something sharp enough to cut through decorum. He blinked, swallowed, and then nothing. His pen slipped from his hand, hitting the table with a small, final sound. "Your motion is denied," the judge said. "All claims dismissed." The gavel struck once, crisp and unambiguous. Across the aisle, Diane froze. For a moment, I saw it. The ghost of her confidence fading under fluorescent light. The woman who once rewrote narratives now sat wordless before the one she couldn't control. As I gathered my papers, my attorney whispered, "She's finished." "No," I said softly. "She's exposed." The smell of ink lingered long after the judge left, thick with the memory of signatures that could no longer be erased. On the table lay the morning newspaper, folded to the story she'd tried to weaponize. Its headline now read like prophecy, not scandal. I touched the edge of the page, feeling the faint oil of newsprint against my skin. Justice, I realized, has its own scent, acidic, honest, undeniable. Outside, the cameras waited, but I didn't stop for them. The air was cold, sharp, alive. Somewhere behind me a pen snapped. The pen trembled, and then broke. When the truth is spoken aloud, it owns the air. The courtroom felt different that morning, less hostile, more deliberate. The seal above the judge's bench glimmered under pale light, its weight no longer threatening but earned. My hands rested on the folder that had carried every scrap of my fight. Receipts, photos, written statements, all labeled neatly in order. The paper edges were softened from use, yet they still held power. The judge's voice broke the stillness. "On charges of falsification, fraud, and harassment, guilty." No one clapped. The silence that followed carried more meaning than applause ever could. I heard the sound of a pen scratching against paper as he continued. "Restitution of $13,400 and a formal restraining order in effect immediately." Her name was spoken, her sentence recorded. The sound echoed once, then fell flat, swallowed by the walls that had heard too many lies before mine. I looked toward her. Diane sat slumped, shoulders folding inward, eyes fixed on the floor. The sharpness she once wore like armor had dulled to a blank, fragile stillness. Her lawyer whispered something she didn't hear, or maybe she finally understood that no whisper could rewrite a verdict. My lawyer nudged the folder toward me. "You'll need to sign here," he murmured. The pen felt heavier than it should have. Each stroke across the page closed another door behind me. The texture of the paper beneath my fingertips grounded me. Rough, honest, unpretending. Justice, I thought, doesn't shimmer. It settles. When the gavel struck, the sound vibrated through my bones. Once, twice, final. For months, I'd lived with the dread that truth might not be enough, that evidence, no matter how clean, could still drown under charm and deceit. But now the air itself seemed purified. I gathered my folder, holding it to my chest. Inside were the fragments of every humiliation, every night of disbelief. Now they were evidence transformed into victory. The napkin she once mocked me for saving, the bank statements she thought I'd never trace, the footage she claimed didn't exist. They were no longer remnants of pain. They were record entries, locked in law. As we stepped outside, flashes went off. Reporters, curious faces, cameras raised like weapons of curiosity. My attorney tried to shield me, but I didn't hide. I lifted my chin. A journalist shouted, "Do you feel vindicated?" I paused, then said quietly, "No, I feel free." He lowered his microphone, as though the answer didn't need a follow-up. The winter air met me like a new page, sharp, bright, real. The courthouse behind me loomed, yet it no longer carried weight. It was just a building now. The power had shifted from its walls to my will. On the steps, I stopped for a breath. A faint scent of rain lingered, the kind that precedes cleansing. Somewhere behind the closed doors, Diane's voice rose faintly, pleading, perhaps, or protesting, but it no longer mattered. I opened my folder one last time before placing it inside my bag. The seal of the court gleamed against the final judgment paper. I traced its embossed edge with my thumb, then let the folder fall shut. The click of its clasp sounded like an ending and a beginning. I didn't cry. I didn't smile. I simply breathed. The folder closed and peace reopened. Silence, once cruel, became my friend again. The morning came softly, the kind that didn't demand anything. Light filtered through the new curtains, clean and pale, touching the walls like forgiveness. The house smelled of paper and tea, no longer of worry. My hands trembled as I poured, but not from fear, just from the weight of remembering what peace felt like. I sat by the window where the glass once reflected only dread. Now it framed the world again, trees swaying gently, children on bicycles, a mail carrier waving. Simple, ordinary things. I hadn't realized how much I'd missed ordinary. My teacup warmed my palms. The first sip carried a quiet I could trust. For months, I'd lived in a constant hum of defense, every sound a signal, every silence a trap. But now, the silence held me. It was steady, patient, mine. I opened my morning journal, just a simple book, the kind you buy without meaning to fill. On the first page, I'd written a single line. "You survived. That's enough for today." Every morning since, I'd added something small. Gratitude in sentences, courage in fragments, hope disguised as handwriting. The gatekeeper from the community stopped by sometimes, leaving folded newsletters and fresh stamps. "It's good to see you outside again," he'd say, with that gentle tone that meant he remembered. I'd nod, because sometimes acknowledgement is better than sympathy. The police file had long been closed, sealed and stored somewhere under reference J42B. But I kept one photocopy inside the folder that now rested at the bottom of my drawer, not as proof, but as a reminder. Truth doesn't vanish when it's written. The sunlight shifted across the table, glinting off the rim of my cup. Light again, my old motif, my old ghost. It no longer blinded. It revealed. Across the street, Mrs. Harlow waved from her porch, holding her own teacup. We didn't need words. Shared mornings say enough. Healing didn't roar. It whispered. It asked for no audience, demanded no verdict. It simply unfolded, one small kindness at a time. I stood and opened the window. The cool air moved through the room, fluttering the curtains, carrying faint sounds of laughter from the next block. That used to make me anxious. Noise meant intrusion. Now it sounded like life returning. The scent of tea lingered, earthy, calm. The kind of aroma that roots you in the moment. I touched the edge of the cup, feeling its smooth rim, a fragile circle holding warmth. Maybe that's what peace really is. Not perfection, but the steady shape that keeps your heart from spilling over. On the journal's next page, I wrote, "Today, the silence was kind." Then I set the pen down and let the quiet stretch between breaths. For the first time, I didn't fill it with thought. I just listened to nothing. And that nothing was enough. Outside, a bird landed on the fence and shook its wings, scattering tiny flecks of light onto the grass. I smiled. Even the smallest movement felt like renewal. I lifted the teacup again. It no longer trembled. I could finally breathe between sips. I lit the same candle, but it burned differently now. The wick caught flame with a faint crackle, soft and alive. I hadn't touched it since the night everything fell apart. It had once stood between us on the kitchen counter, a symbol she mocked, calling it sentimental clutter. Tonight, it was my proof of survival. The light flickered against the picture frame beside it, the old photograph I'd finally taken out from the drawer. The image was worn, corners curling, but it still held my younger face, hopeful, uncertain, unaware of what was coming. I whispered, "I'm sorry for doubting you." The flame trembled, as if it heard. The room smelled faintly of wax and something older, memory maybe. I sat in the quiet, tracing the frame's edge with my thumb, feeling the small scratches like time's signature. For years this house had absorbed lies, anger, court letters, whispered shame. Now it only held truth. The knock on the door startled me. When I opened it, Mrs. Harlow stood there, bundled in her shawl, holding a pie still warm from the oven. "I thought you could use some company," she said. Her smile was steady, like someone who'd seen storms and survived them too. I let her in. She looked around and noticed the candle. "You kept it," she said softly. "It feels different now," I replied. "Before it was just decoration. Now it's a promise." We sat at the table, sharing quiet more than conversation. The world outside dimmed into evening, the last traces of daylight brushing the windows. I realized how much lighter the silence had become, no longer a burden, just space to breathe. She glanced at the photograph. "You look so young there," she said. "But I see her in you still." "Do you?" I asked. "Because some days I don't." Mrs. Harlow reached across, resting her hand over mine. "You never lost your light," she said. "You just forgot where you'd placed it." Her words hit something deep. For months I had been trying to rebuild from ashes, counting proofs and verdicts like milestones. But healing wasn't in the paperwork. It was in these small human moments, the warmth of another hand, the stillness after chaos, the way light found its way back into rooms I once kept dark. The candle burned lower, its flame steadier now. I caught my reflection in the window, lined face, tired eyes, but peace finally finding shape in them. Outside, the neighborhood looked alive again. A child's laughter echoed faintly, and somewhere down the street a window light blinked on. Life, ordinary and good. I leaned back, breathing in the faint scent of melted wax. The shadows on the wall moved softly, the flame dancing but never fading. I thought of the woman I used to be, the one who stayed quiet too long, who believed silence would keep the peace. I wanted to tell her she was wrong, but I also wanted to thank her for surviving long enough to find this night. The photograph caught the candlelight again, and for a moment it looked almost new. The face in it wasn't a stranger anymore. It was mine, reclaimed. Mrs. Harlow stood to leave, wrapping her shawl tighter. "You'll be all right," she said at the door. "I think I already am." After she left, I turned back to the candle. The house felt full, but not crowded. I let the flame burn down naturally, no longer afraid it might go out. When it finally flickered high, a bright, graceful arc, I smiled. The flame danced, unafraid. This time, I served myself. The knife slid through the roast with ease, the scent of rosemary filling the air. Familiar, yet transformed. The kitchen, once a stage for cruelty and quiet humiliation, now felt like my sanctuary. Every surface was mine again, every sound unthreatened. The plate in front of me gleamed under the soft light, a single setting, simple, deliberate, free. I'd spent the morning cleaning, not out of restlessness, but ritual. The act of scrubbing, polishing, restoring, it was how I claimed peace back from memory. The same countertop where she once slammed her glass now reflected calm. Even the clock ticked differently, no longer counting fear, but measuring life. I placed the dinner setting carefully, fork on the left, knife on the right, glass centered above the plate. The precision comforted me. It wasn't about order, it was about choice. Then I lit the candle. Its flame rose steady, unshaken by draft or doubt. I remembered the night she'd blown it out mid-argument, mocking the gesture. "Candles don't make truth," she'd said. She was wrong. Candles remember truth. They hold what we cannot say aloud. I sat down, folded my hands, and whispered, "I swore the candle would never die again." The words didn't tremble this time. They landed softly, certain. Outside, dusk leaned against the windows, spilling shadows across the walls. The quiet hummed, not heavy anymore, but alive. I listened to the faint hiss of the flame, the rhythm of my breathing. Even silence had shape now. My protector had checked in earlier that day, just to be sure I was fine. "You've done enough fighting," he'd said. "Now you can just live." I smiled at that, because living was the one thing I had postponed the longest. Survival had taken up too much space. Living, I realized, required gentleness. I poured a small glass of wine, exactly 5 ounces, no more, no less. I'd read somewhere that moderation is its own form of rebellion after chaos. The scent of it mixed with the herbs from dinner, faint and warm. I took a slow sip and felt it anchor me. Across the table, the candle's light caught the photograph I'd moved here from the living room. It wasn't the old one. This one was new. A small picture from the courthouse steps, taken the day the verdict came. My expression wasn't joy or pride. It was something quieter. Peace, earned the hard way. I cut into the roast, the sound of knife meeting plate echoing through the room. A clean sound. Final. For a moment, I let myself imagine she was sitting across from me, watching. Not as a ghost, not as power, but as memory. Contained. Harmless. I didn't hate her anymore. Hatred had taken enough already. Forgiveness wasn't approval. It was release. I took another bite. Each one slower, more deliberate, like reclaiming something lost. The taste was fuller somehow, richer, not because of the food, but because of presence. For the first time in years, I tasted without dread. The candle flickered once, then steadied again. I reached forward and shielded it with my hand, smiling at the warmth brushing my skin. This was my vow made visible. Fragile, yes, but alive. I thought of every night I'd eaten in silence while pretending to be invisible. And now, here I was, alone and unafraid, feeding the life I almost forgot I deserved. The scent of rosemary deepened, wrapping the room in calm. Outside, a faint wind moved through the garden, carrying whispers of leaves brushing against the window. It sounded like breathing, steady, human, free. I lifted the glass once more. "To truth," I said quietly, "and to staying lit." The candle burned, and this time it stayed lit.